Deadly skirmishes in the disputed region of Kashmir this month set India and Pakistan back at each other's throats. 5 soldiers were killed in the worst crisis in relations since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. But already tensions are easing as the nuclear neighbours consider the bigger peace process. I'm Sheila Ghosh, you're with Inside Story. The territorial dispute between India and Pakistan over the Kashmir region has claimed thousands of lives. And that death toll grew further this month. India even accused Pakistan of beheading one of its soldiers. And there was international concern that the dispute could escalate. Now, 3 weeks on, people are once again crossing the border and trade between the two sides is due to resume on Tuesday. Well, Kashmir has long been a flashpoint between the two nuclear-powered nations, with 2 wars being fought because of it. Divided by the line of control, the problem of Indian-administered Kashmir and Pakistan-administered Kashmir remains one of the most intractable of modern times. Now, all the signs are that people living in the territory are tired of the conflict and desperately hoping for a negotiated peace. But despite confidence-building measures between the two countries, no solution is in sight. Let's join our guests now. In New Delhi, Commodore Uday Bashkar. He's a former naval officer and strategic analyst. In Islamabad, Maria Sultan, director of the South Asian Strategic Stability Institute. And in Washington, D.C., Daniel Markey, Senior Fellow for India, Pakistan and South Asia at the think tank, the Council on Foreign Relations. A warm welcome to all my guests. Now, it seems that things seem to have been getting back to normal quite quickly in the Jammu region. I wonder what you think about that, whether that's what you expected. Uday, is that what you expected to happen so soon after those clashes at the border?
If you look at the way in which the two governments responded to the flare-up on the line of control, I would say that it was encouraging that the political leadership on both sides ensured that whatever was happening across the line of control did not escalate any further. And my own sense is that there was the equivalent of an internal consultation, and it was decided that the incident that had led to the flare-up in the first few days would be dealt with by the two armies, and that at the political level, the diplomatic contacts that have already been established would be allowed to move ahead. And I think the most positive sign is the fact that the transport links, the bus route between 2 points on either side of Kashmir, that is the Indian side of Jammu and Kashmir and what in India is described as Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the Poonch-Rawalkot, has also been resumed. So I see this as a positive sign, and the fact that both governments have taken stock of what had happened and are trying to ensure that they would have procedures in place along the line of control that would not allow for a recurrence or a repeat of what led to this particular flare-up in the first instance. OK,
well, let's look at the immediate response of both governments, because after that incident, the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was driven to say this: after this barbaric act, there cannot be business as usual with Pakistan. What happened at the line of control is unacceptable. And Pakistan's Foreign Minister, Hina Rabbani Khan, responded by saying, "We see warmongering." It is deeply disturbing to hear statements which are upping the ante, where one politician is competing with the other to give a more hostile statement. Maria, Uday is suggesting that obviously there was some discourse between the two governments to ensure that something like this didn't escalate. But the immediate aftermath was one of quite strong warlike rhetoric, wasn't it?
I think you're 100% accurate in stating that, because unfortunately the rhetoric which we saw from New Delhi was much stronger than we have seen in the past, and most importantly, it was creating very high temperatures as well inside India. But I think on this side of the border, especially in Pakistan, there was a deliberate effort not to respond to this and not to get into that warmongering mindset. And for that, if you would see particularly none of the army chief, air chief, or for that matter the naval chief of Pakistan responded to the threats made by the Indian air chief, the naval chief, or for that matter the various respective chiefs on this issue. And let's not forget, the line of control is not something, the skirmishes on the line of control are not something new. This is something which we have been facing in this region for almost 65 years. And in order to deal with it, there has been a comprehensive arrangement between the two sides' militaries, both through the enactment of the hotlines between the two military commanders and also at the Director of Military Plans and Ops. In addition to that, then recently there had also been hotlines which had been established between the Indian respective military headquarters as well as Pakistani military headquarters. But the unfortunate thing, I think, which seems to put the entire debate on a hold, is the fact that there doesn't seem to be the political resolve available which is required to take this issue forward, because Pakistan believes that it is an issue which is a bilateral dispute between India and Pakistan, clearly stated in the UN principles and also enacted through the UN resolutions, while India argues that it's an internal issue. So when you have two different ideas as to what the issue stands for, you cannot have constructive conflict resolution and you cannot move forward. And for that, it is necessary that both sides agree to it, and then it would be a need and a requirement by both sides to have the political will to go forward if we have to come out of this issue through a peaceful negotiation.
I mean, Daniel, both sides there saying that, you know, both our guests in New Delhi and in Pakistan saying that, you know, both sides clearly don't want this to escalate, but some question over how we go forward. Now, there have been improvements in relations between India and Pakistan of late, and there has been a decline in the violence that we've seen in Kashmir. The potential is clearly still there for violence, but there does seem to be moves towards reaching some kind of agreement.
No, I think that's right. And I think here in Washington, the concern has been that while this particular dispute looks now, and certainly in retrospect, more as a hiccup in a process of dialogue between the two countries, at the time it provided an opening perhaps for a terrorist attack or something else that might have escalated not just the rhetoric from the political classes in New Delhi or Islamabad, but the actions by the two militaries on either side. And unfortunately, we've seen that before, and it has been a long time, I should say decades, that both Indian and Pakistani political leaders have recognized that a war didn't really suit their purposes. And yet, at the same time, we've come all too close to a military conflict between those two sides, in spite of that fact. So here, at least in Washington, I think the concern is that you might see a small event, a spiral out of the control of the political classes in either capital.
Well, let's just have a look at the background to this dispute, since you talk about it going on for decades. You're quite right. Kashmir, of course, has been the cause of numerous conflicts since India and Pakistan gained independence from Britain in 1947. War broke out later that year when Kashmir became part of India. Now, both sides later agreed to a ceasefire along what became known as the line of control. A second war in 1965 ended when India and Pakistan agreed to adopt a UN-sponsored resolution to stick to that unofficial border. In 2001, India invited Pakistan to a summit in Agra, but the peace talks fell through. Now, 2 years later, Pakistan called for a ceasefire along the line of control. More talks followed. But the 2008 Mumbai attack, which India blamed on Pakistan, halted any diplomatic progress. Just as tensions were showing signs of easing, the clashes along the disputed frontier this month threatened to set relations back again. Uday, there has been a number of talks, a series of peace talks between India and Pakistan. But Maria is saying that there is a fundamental disagreement between the two countries on what kind of dispute this is. Pakistan sees it as one that should be solved bilaterally. India is saying it's an internal problem.
No, as far as the dispute is concerned, if you look at the way in which the two countries have arrived at what I would call as an agreement, it's really the Shimla Agreement of 1972. This was arrived at after the war for Bangladesh, and between India and Pakistan, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at the time, the spirit of the Shimla Agreement really was that India, having returned the prisoners of war who had been captured, there were more than 90,000 at that time, and India did not retain any of the territory that had been acquired or captured during the military operation. The political agreement at Shimla in 1972 was that all disputes and all the differences that existed between India and Pakistan would be addressed in a bilateral manner. And Kashmir was also part of this. From then to now, from 1972 to where we are now, and as you rightly pointed out, there have been attempts made in the past, most recently, I would say, in the decade after 1999, when we had the Kargil War. And yes, it has been the equivalent of 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. Occasionally, we moved even sideways. But the defining agreement for India and Pakistan was that signed in 2004, January of 2004, between Mr. Vajpayee, who was the Prime Minister in India, and General Musharraf, who was at the helm of affairs in Pakistan as Chief of Army Staff and the President. And the spirit of that agreement, if I may sort of remind ourselves and the viewers, is that Pakistan would desist from supporting any kind of terror which was directed against India, and India, as the status quo power in the relationship, wanted to move ahead on all the other areas that have come up, or the issues that have come up for discussion between India and Pakistan.
But Pakistan
now,
did
as
stop.
We were moving
Pakistan
along
did say that it
track,
had stopped funding those groups who were active in Kashmir. Isn't that the case?
That's the point, Shuli. I'm just saying that, if you look from 2004 onwards, whatever progress was being made in the last couple of years of General Musharraf's watch, the clock was set back because of Mumbai, November 2008. I hardly need recall the details of Mumbai, but we've just had the David Headley case in Chicago, and there is enough in the public domain to really, I think, point to the kind of challenge that India has faced.
Yeah, I can see Maria's nodding at that. And Maria, it is true, isn't it, that Mumbai was the great big boulder in the path to any peace talks between India and Pakistan?
I think India has been falling behind one excuse or the other not to take the issue of Kashmir very seriously. It's all fine and good to say that 1972 was the watershed for Kashmir, but let's not forget it's 1949 when India took the resolution, took the matter to the UN Security Council, asking for a ceasefire there. And it's not in 1972 that they agreed, it was 1949. They agreed to the UN for a plebiscite there, and also for withdrawing its troops from there. And then under Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, it recognizes Kashmiris their right to that state. If it was an integral part of India, it would not have happened. And I think let's not also forget, when we talk about the right of self-determination and the fact that it's a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan left behind from partition, we would have to see things that way. Uday has been very kind to refer to the 1971 war and say that 90,000 Indian troops were, 90,000 Pakistani troops were given back and India did not keep any territory. Let's not forget that Pakistan had taken 200 kilometers of Indian territory, which was negotiated for the part of the 90,000 Pakistani troops which went back. And the ceasefire line which came into existence, and if you look at the Lahore Declaration, we look at all of these things, they talked about looking and working on Kashmir issue very seriously. But unfortunately, every time there's an issue in between in India, they tend to, lump all the issues together. Kashmir is an issue which needs to be seen in its entirety. It needs to be seen differently. And most importantly, and according to the UN principle itself, it says, that people who are fighting for the right of self-determination, they can be militarily, politically, and diplomatically helped. But leaving that question and that debate aside, Pakistan has made an issue, has made a deliberate effort to move away from a policy of supporting this movement internally, militarily. That set aside, there seems to be no joint terrorism
but Maria,
task force
there is still suspicion, isn't there?
Investigation process they have been put in forward.
There is still this accusation that even though Pakistan has officially banned these militant groups, there are still hundreds and hundreds of armed fighters still active.
You see, the thing is that so on, you will have the issue inside Kashmir. So long, you have more than 500,000 Indian military troops in an area which is just the valley. And so long, this is not an area which India has committed, according to the UN, to be an area free of intimidation, free of human rights violations, so that the rights of the people of Kashmir can be held. It does not become that area. You would always find issues in which people will sponsor different kind of activities. But that is the nature of the region in which we are living. Unfortunate as it is, we have to understand that terrorism here is a transnational phenomena. It's a transnational phenomena which is based on ideas where people believe that their rights to self-determination and their right for the freedom of expression, the basic right to life, is not being given to them. So as unfortunate as it is, but that's how the region is. And if we really need to work on it, as both countries, India and Pakistan, we will need to progressively work on it, and work on it in a sincere manner by the political will, as well as technical experts working on it relentlessly, so that some kind of dispute, solution can come of age.
Daniel, there's clearly a lot of suspicion and issues on both sides. Uday described it as one step forward, two steps back. Has there been any progress?
I would say that actually we've been, here in Washington, we've been impressed and surprised in some ways by some of the progress that we've seen over the past 18 months or so. Leaving aside the recent violation of the line of control and obviously the heated rhetoric that's gone back and forth, India and Pakistan do appear to have made some important progress, and this, frankly, wasn't anticipated by me or many others here in Washington.
But are they just being left to get on with it themselves, or should there be more foreign pressure on them? Should there be more US pressure on both sides to make an agreement?
Right. Well, I'll tell a quick story. When I worked at the State Department in about 2006, when Condoleezza Rice came over to be the Secretary of State, one of the intelligence analysts told me that, at the beginning of every new Secretary of State's administration, they ask for a memo describing all that Washington should do to help resolve the dispute in Kashmir. Many of them believing year after year that this is something that's relatively easily done, and potentially something that will win that Secretary of State Nobel Peace Prize. And every time the memo gets written, the Secretary of State reads it, determines that it's actually a very complicated and difficult project, one that has a long history, as we've heard, and then turns his or her attentions over to something that they believe more likely to be tractable, say peace in the Middle East or something like that, because they recognize just how difficult this project is.
Yeah, in fact,
I think how relatively little leverage Washington has.
Well, I was going to ask you that, whether the US does have leverage, because it clearly has ties to both countries, and I'm wondering whether a US mediated solution would have a chance of success. But I think you're right. I think President Obama last July made it clear that this is not something that he thinks foreign powers should get involved in.
Well, it's not just a matter of that we shouldn't get involved. It's that if we get involved, it may not be helpful. Like I say, we've seen some progress on the two sides, and many times it seems like the progress is best when we are actually strong, have good relations with both sides independently. They call that dehyphenation here in Washington. And the idea is that we can be supportive of Islamabad, we can be supportive of New Delhi, but that we shouldn't use our leverage to push them together, because no amount of U.S. leverage, nothing that we could possibly put on offer, would get these large countries to do something that they don't perceive to be in their own national interests, given the fact that they've gone to war numerous times over this issue. And Washington will not go to war over this particular issue ever, as far as I could tell. It's just not as high a priority for us as it is for them. That said, we want to support anything and everything that they can come to the table with, and that's why people have been pretty happy with the direction the relationship has taken. If I could make one other point, it would simply be that my perception is that India and leaders in India, I'd be curious to hear what Uday has to say about this, but leaders in India see what has happened as very tactical maneuvers by the Pakistanis. They don't believe that Pakistan has made a significant shift in its relationship with India, and they're not inclined to respond in major ways. They want to do kind of more tit for tat. If Pakistan is willing to open up visa regimes, India will do the same. But they're not eager or willing or inclined even to go down the path toward a comprehensive settlement of the sort that Maria and many in Islamabad might like to see.
Do you agree with that point, Uday?
Yeah, I think Daniel has made a fairly accurate kind of assessment, which is that what has happened on the line of control is being seen as a local issue, a tactical issue, which the two militaries would need to address. And this is where I think Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's statement needs to be seen in context, which is that, as I'm sure most of you are aware, ever since he became Prime Minister in 2004, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has, in a way, pursued or continued the policy of Mr. Vajpayee, his predecessor, which is to engage with Pakistan and see how the bilateral could be improved. Now, he's faced a lot of domestic flack in India because of post-Mumbai and disappointment in India that the state in Pakistan has not really moved as quickly as it ought to in terms of bringing the perpetrators to justice. Then in between, of course, we've had the disappointment that the rest of the world has had with Pakistan over bin Laden and Abbottabad and the way in which the Pakistani military has been perceived in terms of its links with terror. Notwithstanding, I'd like to make the point that Dr. Manmohan Singh remains committed to the bilateral and the improvement, which is why we invested in the MFN and the visa process. But on this incident, given the kind of outrage in India, particularly about the beheading and the responses it generated, I think he made what I thought was a very appropriate kind of line, which is to say it cannot be business as usual, which is what we were doing in the past. And Pakistan really has to review in terms of how the terrorist elements or the acts of what the army is now supposed to have done over there, that these need to be addressed. So which is why I think the attempt here,
let me put that point to Maria.
They have tried to keep it low.
Maria, the problem seems to be that there are hardline elements that both governments have to deal with who do not want to see any concessions or compromises being made on this issue. Is that one of the problems?
I think hardliners always exist, but I think unfortunately, the Indian political leadership and the military leadership tend to see things, only in one manner, and that's how they see it domestically for their domestic audience. Because when Pakistan had offered very clearly that why don't we ask the United Nations Military Observer Group for India and Pakistan to investigate the matter, India should have said yes rather than it's issuing a threat, because that would have brought in a third party who would have investigated the matter, whether it was true or not. And let's not forget that Pakistan is a professional military organization, has a professional military organization, and would not be looking into it. Coming to what you had said, that you have got hardliners, and I think this is one of the biggest concerns which Pakistan also has, particularly what was said by the Indian Home Minister, that the Shiv Sena and the saffron color of the Indian political class has not only tried to derail the India-Pakistan peace process under the Samjhauta Express, but also has carried out various kinds of terrorist activities inside Jammu and Kashmir, which have gone to the detriment of the peace process between India and Pakistan. So I think when we are dealing with the issue of terrorism, we need to see things very clearly, and it's not a good idea to blame things on Pakistan just in order not to deal with the questions which have arisen inside India.
Are there going to be more peace talks, Maria? Are there going to be more peace talks between both sides?
I think Pakistan would appreciate that, and Pakistan is looking forward for that. But I think what is required between India and Pakistan is the sincerity and also the continuity of the composite dialogue on all matters, including the issue of Kashmir, to be held sustainably and not made hostage to any incident which happens between India and Pakistan. Because, as you said, there will be issues, there are parties, and in Pakistan there might be few. In India, it's a political class, it's a political party, and which has come to power as well, which is against the peace process. So this needs to be seen
we're
very
coming
clearly,
to the end.
And there needs to be a caution on that.
Very last word to Daniel. Do you see both sides bending, or are we going to see some more progress in the future?
Yeah, I think they'll both come back, and I think they both, certainly on the political side, they both have an interest in resuming negotiations, particularly on the commercial front. And here, both sides stand to gain quite a lot. Pakistani businessmen I've talked to in Karachi and elsewhere, many of them are quite eager to see opportunities in India's growing market, and India as well. And that's the kind of thing that I think over the longer term, you could see eventually an accumulation of constituencies for peace on both sides that will outweigh the hardliners that obviously do exist and continue to exist on both sides as well.
Thank you very much indeed to all three of my guests. Interesting discussion there. That's Uday Bashkar, Maria Sultan and Daniel Markey. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Don't forget, you can join the discussion. You can send us your feedback. Email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. From me, Shuri Ghosh. Bye for now.